Are your brackets busted yet? I'm Charlie Sykes. Sunday Insight starts right now. Good morning. Welcome to Sunday Insight. In the week that was, March Madness begins, providing a much-needed distraction from the political madness. Hillary Clinton sweeps the primaries on mini Super Tuesday. Trump wins Florida, knocking out Marco Rubio, but loses Ohio to John Kasich. UWM fires its men's basketball coach, Rob Jeter, after 11 seasons. President Obama appoints Judge Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court, a move that Republicans vow to block, at least until after the election. And the stock market moves into positive territory for the year. But we start with the latest war of words in the presidential race. Donald Trump leads in the race for delegates, but he needs to win a majority, at least 1,237 delegates, to win the Republican presidential nomination in July. And it's not clear that any candidate can get to the Cleveland convention with that majority, which raises the possibility of an open or contested convention. Last week, Trump said that if the convention failed to give him that nomination, it could lead to riots.
I think we'll win before getting to the convention, but I can tell you, if we didn't, and if we're 20 votes short, or if we're 100 short, and we're at 1,100 and somebody else is at 500 or 400, because we're way ahead of everybody, I don't think you can say that we don't get it automatically. I think you'd have riots. I'm representing a tremendous, many millions of people. I wouldn't lead it, but I think bad things would happen.
Bad things. That drew a quick response from Speaker Paul Ryan.
Nobody should say such things, in my opinion, because to even address or hint to violence is unacceptable.
Joining me on our panel this morning, the Milwaukee Community Journal's Mikel Holt, former State Representative Michelle Litjens, Defense Attorney Dan Adams, and Media Tracker's Brian Sikma. What is Donald Trump doing there, other than being Donald Trump?
Well, I'm reminded of Benjamin Franklin's quote whenever he said, we've created a republic if you can keep it. And the Republican National Committee process is actually a very Republican process. You select delegates to go to the convention. They're bound on that first ballot, depending upon how states' rules work. But then after that, if nobody has that majority, that's whenever you have to build coalitions. And Donald Trump is ignoring the fact that while he has the delegate lead, the majority of Republican voters have spoken, and they have said they do not want Donald Trump to be the nominee. So the fact of the matter is, going into the convention, if this thing's not decided, everybody's going to have an even playing field. And he's acting like a third world dictator when he hints at violence. He knows the GOP doesn't want him to be the nominee. He's also betting on the fact that if he hints at violence, the dangers of violence will be more of a threat to Republican Party than him being the nominee. And so he's trying to use fear to coerce people.
Okay, is he threatening, or is he just simply stating the reality that if he is not automatically given this nomination, that bad things will happen? I mean, isn't he right? Won't there be absolute turmoil if somebody else comes out of there with that nomination?
I think there'd be absolute turmoil if somebody who didn't run this cycle came out of there. I don't think Republicans would be wise to pick somebody who didn't throw their hat in the ring. But the fact is, there's going to be somebody who comes out of that convention who's probably going to be a strong nominee if their last name isn't Donald Trump.
Okay, you're enjoying this, aren't you, Dan Adams?
Not really. No. You know, the reason we have free and fair elections is so that we avoid violence. That's the whole point of having a democratic system of government, is so we're not out fighting in the streets when there's a transfer of power. You know, I think your analogy of a third world dictator is spot on. You know, on his worst days, he looks like Milosevic. On his best days, he looks like like Silvio Berlusconi or somebody like this. And it's really outside of the American tradition. And I think Paul Ryan needs to be stronger on this.
All right, but on the front page of the Wall Street Journal on Friday, they had a story saying, that Clinton allies, including a lot of liberal organizations financed by George Soros, MoveOn.org, are planning to have massive rallies and demonstrations, including protests at the Cleveland convention. So is there a double standard here, that we're pointing the finger at Donald Trump talking about violence, when in fact there's a long tradition of civil disobedience on the part of the left, and more promises for disruption in Cleveland from the left, Mikel Holt?
If they're allowed in. But, Donald Trump is
they're not going to get in the building, but they're going to be allowed in Cleveland.
Yeah.
Unless Donald Trump
that promotes violence in itself. Donald Trump is slick, because every time he says something, his people respond.
Right.
It's like he's sending out hints and secret messages. He said somebody was a member of ISIS, and some of his fans jumped on that person, turned out to be a reporter. He said he would punch this guy in the face, and then one of his older guy punched the guy in the face. So he's a predictor, and I think what he's doing is creating this fear that things better go his way or
Well, if he's betting on the Republicans not being able to stand up to him, he's been right so far, hasn't he?
Well, in that sense, but he has a responsibility.
Yeah.
There is so much anger and anxiety out there, and he has the opportunity to say, you might be angry and you can protest, but violence is never acceptable. He has that opportunity to talk to all of his legions of followers, those millions of people, and tell them violence is not acceptable, and he's not telling them
This
that.
is an interesting point, because you would think at some point we keep waiting for Donald Trump to make that pivot to be more inclusive. Well, yes, to be more presidential, to bring the party together, and in fact he hasn't done it. But I do think that in fact this implicit threat has now become part of his convention strategy, which is to say, look, we need to absolutely treat a plurality like a majority. The reality is that a plurality is not a majority, that if he goes in there with 1,100 delegates, he doesn't automatically get the nomination, because that will mean that a majority of the delegates support somebody else. And the majority of the delegates do have a right under the rules to be able to nominate somebody who actually is a conservative, actually is a Republican, and actually might be electable.
Well, I don't understand why Donald Trump is worried about a brokered convention if he doesn't meet that majority threshold going in. This is the guy who writes the art of the deal, tells everybody he knows how to make good deals. Cleveland's a great place to prove that, if that's really the case.
Apparently the chapter in The Art of the Deal is, and if you can't make a deal, you smash them. What does your glass have full? Nice party you have there. It'd be a shame if anything happened to it. What has your glass half full and empty? Let's go around the table, Michael Holt.
Well, my glass is half full because President Obama called the Republicans bluff and nominated Judge Garland, a moderate, to the Supreme Court. My glass is half empty because the president should have nominated a black man or woman to the bench, as should President Hillary Clinton. They owe us that much.
Subtle. Michelle Litjens.
Well, my glass is half empty because the only presidential candidate who spoke about his love of country and Americans' greatness dropped out last week, Marco Rubio. So now my presidential primary glass is just half full.
Dan Adams.
Oh, my glass is half full because State Senators Lena Taylor and Van Wanggaard found bipartisan common ground this week, pushing to legalize CBD oil, an anti-seizure medication derived from marijuana. My glass is half empty because the Senate Republicans leaders are now blocking the bill, causing children in our state with some forms of epilepsy to be without this treatment option.
Brian Sikma.
My glass is half full because Assembly Republicans passed the REINS Act to hold unelected bureaucrats accountable for costs and new regulations, but my glass is half empty because this week 3 Republicans, Senator Luther Olson, Senator Sheila Harsdorf, and Senator Rob Coles, killed the reform.
Well, my glass is half empty because the liberal hit group, One Wisconsin Now, put out a press release saying that it had found more evidence that Justice Rebecca Bradley was an extreme right-winger. It is half full because their evidence was, and I'm not making this up, an interview where she said that her favorite slogan was, "Don't tread on me." That's it. You know, the phrase from the Revolutionary War, the slogan on the Vermont state flag, the slogan used by U.S. Soccer and the U.S. Navy. Epic fail for One Wisconsin Now, and yet another smear attempt that backfired. Our Sunday Inside Countdown shows that we're just 2 days away from primaries in Arizona and Utah and the Democratic Party caucus in Idaho. The Wisconsin primary is just 16 days away, and the Republican National Convention begins in 120 days. We'll be right back. Sheriff David Clark weighs into the race for Milwaukee mayor with an endorsement of challenger Bob Donovan.
I am voting for and endorsing Alderman Bob Donovan to be the next mayor of the city of Milwaukee, and I implore the voters of this city to do the same so that we can begin anew in making Milwaukee livable again.
Meanwhile, the air war between County Executive Chris Abele and challenger Chris Larson intensifies. Now, let's talk about this. Does Clark's endorsement make any difference in the mayor's race, do you think, Michael Holt?
No, not really.
Why not?
Essentially because the mayor has been more effective in laying out the groundwork. He has Donovan totally under the fence. You know, when they did that on-air debate, he just massacred Bob Donovan, even brought up a letter from the 70s in which he implied that the problems with Milwaukee were rooted in the black community, those kind of things. You know, Joe Davis endorsed Donovan because he was, in essence, saying, you know, the status quo is not good enough. And that was a valid point, but he wasn't endorsing
Brian Sikma.
Well, I mean, the problem with having Sheriff Clark endorses that he's the Milwaukee County Sheriff, and Bob Donovan's only going to get votes for the city of Milwaukee, so that's a little bit of a challenge for him. But as you look at this race, I mean, Tom Barrett, for Bob Donovan to win, Tom Barrett has to make enough people mad, and he's a status quo candidate. But the question is, will Milwaukee city voters actually be fed up with what's going on in the city of Milwaukee enough to elect someone to change the problem? Nobody would ever look at Tom Barrett and say, wow, there's an outstanding big city mayor. But the question is, do they want to take a bet on a supposedly unproven candidate, somebody like Bob Donovan, who's really not been all that effective, I think, in getting his message out?
I will say this. I think that was probably, what you just saw, was probably the high point of the Donovan campaign. The only problem is that's the only high point that he's had in this campaign. Now, I will say that Sheriff David Clark's radio ad on behalf of Supreme Court Justice Rebecca Bradley is much more powerful, and I think will move the needle a little bit more. Let's talk about the county execs race, because a lot of political insiders who had written off the possibility that Chris Larson could upset Chris Abele are getting a little bit concerned. And, there's no polling in this race, that at least no public polling that we've seen in this race. What is your sense going on in this race? Who has the momentum?
Well,
you're an Abele supporter. So
the only poll that mattered was the February primary.
Right.
I mean, that's...
And Abele lost.
And he did. Yeah. And I actually think, ironically, that was a good thing, because people who may have been complacent weren't thinking about it. People in the business community, moderate Democrats, are now going, oh, wait, we could actually lose a really good elected official in Abele. And I also think it sent or sounded the alarm bells in the Abele campaign itself, and they are being more aggressive.
But the Abele campaign continued to try to run to the left of Chris Larson, which is not possible, alienating the exact voters that he would need to win.
But I think they're making the point that Chris Larson is not Bernie Sanders. Chris Larson takes money from J.P. Morgan, Chase, and others, and votes their way.
How do you read
it's very unfortunate that the Abele campaign has not realized that they cannot run to the left of Chris Larson. And it's sad that he needs outside groups out there trying to defend him, trying to say, actually, he's been pretty moderate as county executive. If you want to continue to bring jobs to Milwaukee, you need to have Chris Abele as county executive.
I have said this before. I'm guessing that Chris Abele would like that that $250,000 that he blew trying to destroy Sheriff Clark back right now. You may not want to hear it, but we'll tell you anyway. Let's hand out some unsolicited advice. Michael Holt, you're first.
Well, mine's to Chris Larson, we just talked about. Chris, do you really think you can threaten State Senator Lena Taylor and then imply she's on meds and still count on the black vote? You should be lucky somebody didn't.
Michelle Litjens.
To the media, stop your Trump derangement syndrome. You've given the man almost $2 billion in free airtime, and we are tired of seeing and hearing about Trump 24/7.
Dan Adams.
Well, friendly advice for Milwaukee County Supervisor Theo Lipscomb: stop spending tens of thousands of taxpayer dollars on fancy lawyers to sue the county. It's so wasteful and becoming a scandal in itself.
I thought you were a fancy lawyer. Brian Sikma.
Well, my unsolicited advice is for the Wisconsin press corps. Do your job. You copy and paste from left-wing press releases, but you can't be bothered to report on what Senator Ron Johnson is doing in Washington. Take a look at whether or not Senator Johnson is doing what he told Wisconsin voters he would do in 2010. Hint, he's doing it.
Well, my advice is for the supporters of a $15 an hour minimum wage. Pay attention to all of the restaurant chains that are actively now talking about switching to completely automated systems. $15 an hour would accelerate that trend and would kill the jobs of the people you think you are helping. Next on Sunday Insight, what do you think of the latest renderings for the new Bucks Arena, and does it remind you of anything? And there it is, the first detailed look at the new $500 million Bucks Arena with, well, it's got an unusual look. Some fans like the distinctive swoop of the roof, while others thought it looked like this. Yeah. Okay, we're going to just call it the Trump. I mean,
come on.
What do you think of that?
This has all the promise.
It looks like Donald Trump's comb-over.
No, I disagree. That brown is going to be a treated zinc, really unique outlook. I think the Bucks have done what they said they were going to do, which is to make an iconic, catalytic building for the west side of downtown. Think of people who lambasted the Calatrava when it came out.
Oh, the Calatrava is gorgeous.
Now we think, but there was controversy when that was sprung.
Doesn't that look like the taco place, the Bel Air on the east side? You know, the fashionable east side.
Who knows how they were inspired? I think it's cool.
Okay, you're the aesthete here.
Well, I'm so disappointed. Why can't they just make it look like an arena? Right?
That
And just
was
let it fill in or fit in a little bit more with
box?
the area.
Yeah.
I mean, they have to make it in, and that's an eyesore you're going to be looking at for decades.
I would
Michael
have to see
Holt?
it up close and personal.
Yeah,
But I remember
by that point, it'll be too late.
But you know, I remember there was a lot of criticism from some folks, not you, a lot of criticism from a lot of folks about Miller Park, the original look because of the roof.
Yeah.
And then I remember
Not like
once.
this.
Well, yeah, I remember once when you were kidding when We Energies became We Energies. What did you call it? Winergies?
I don't remember. No,
I remember
I
that.
don't remember.
Wisconsin
Okay,
Electric
look,
and Gas.
just
but,
because, I guess the thing is that we don't have to, we're not required to like everything, right? I mean, it's not a sign of like to say, because remember we had a discussion in this community about the big blue shirt. Remember, there were some, when they built that big, Pepto-Bismol, well, that blue bottle building, the federal building, there were some people who said that's really going to be an eyesore. It turned out to be an eyesore. So I don't know. I assume these are preliminary things, but when I opened up the phone lines, people thought it looked like a broken beer barrel. They thought it looked like an upturned ship. And some people thought it looked like a taco.
But think about the health benefits of this. Dan said it's going to have some kind of zinc base. Zinc is good for colds.
Yeah.
So when you go down there in January, you'll have your cold cured.
Well, sure. You go down in January and you lick it. Okay, what do you think, Brian?
Well, I could think of no more appropriate design because here we have out-of-state billionaires who are living off of crony capitalism. So now this arena.
Bernie Sanders, everyone.
I was trying to imagine your out-of-state billionaires who are big Democratic donors, big Hillary Clinton supporters, finally figure out, oh my gosh, it looks like Donald Trump's hair, and we're paying how much for this? So what is it you don't get this week? Let's go around the table. Michael Holt, you're first.
What I don't get is what's going on in Madison. First, it's named the 10th most racist city in America. Now the UW Chancellor institutes new programs to address mounting racism. Are we talking about Madison?
Talking about liberals? Michelle Litjens.
What I don't get is why Chris Abely's supporters are spending money trying to gain conservative voters' support, and Abely still isn't catching on that that's what he has to do to win in April.
Dan Adams.
Well, I don't get how State Senator Chris Larson voted for the Bucks Arena deal, saying it would create jobs, but now criticizes Chris Abely for the same arena deal. Senator Larson, you are ridiculous.
Brian Sikma.
Well, what I don't get is why Hillary Clinton said this week, quote, "We didn't lose a single person," unquote, in Libya while she was Secretary of State. Hasn't she ever heard of Benghazi?
Yeah. Well, honestly, how is it that Republican voters don't understand that they are handing the election to Hillary Clinton if they nominate a man who is dramatically underwater with women, young people, and every emerging minority group? Next on Sunday Inside, our panel picks the winners and losers of the week. But first, here's your morning news update. It's time for our panel to pick the winners and losers of the week. Michael Holt, you're first.
Well, my loser, Bob Donovan. Mayor Tom Barrett took him apart during their on-air debate. It was classic. Choice in charter school students outperform public school students according to state evaluations. That should be the winner, but educrats and poverty pimps will never acknowledge the benefits of educational options for the poor.
Michelle Litjens.
You're right. My winners are the parents who fought hard in Madison to make cannabis oil accessible to their children who suffer from seizures. It passed in the Assembly but died in the Senate. I know these courageous parents will be back again next session fighting for their children. My loser is the 59-year-old idiot in Pittsburgh who was upset that his pizza was delivered so late that he drove his pizza back to the restaurant and threw it and other objects at the employees with anger. I don't even want to guess who this angry guy is voting for this fall.
Dan Adams.
Well, my winner is Supreme Court nominee Merrick Garland. His credentials and reputation for integrity are just off the charts, and he should be given a fair hearing. My losers are Republican senators, including Ron Johnson, who think blocking the moderate, indisputably qualified Garland is good policy or politics. When President Hillary Clinton nominates a young liberal to fill Scalia's seat next year, there's going to be a lot of eggs on a lot of faces.
Brian Sikma.
Well, my winners this week are economically disadvantaged Wisconsin choice school students who we learned this week are outperforming their public school peers. Competition works. Well, my loser this week is One Wisconsin Now and Scott Ross, who beclowned themselves by claiming that the phrase "don't tread on me" is extremist. Apparently, Scott Ross doesn't know that that phrase appears on various historical flags flown by the U.S. military during the War on Terror, or that it was a common refrain during the 18th century among Americans calling for independence and defending human liberty.
Well, my winner is Paul Ryan, who has emerged as the one grown-up in the Republican Party these days. Losers, Republicans who sit on the sidelines and don't speak about Donald Trump until it is too late, including, and you know who I'm talking about, people who are not making an endorsement yet. Thanks for joining us and join me for my radio show Monday morning on News Radio 620 WTMJ from 8:30 until noon. Have a great week.